Hello, everyone, and thank you for watching today. Also, welcome to our panelists who join us from different parts of the world, and we'll discuss REDS. This is part of our International Youth Dancer Health Awareness Week 2025. First of all, I would like to introduce myself. I'm Juncal Roman. I'm the head of healthcare at the English National Ballet School. I've been working in performing arts for the last 15 years, in circus, performing arts such as musical theater and ballet over the last 10 years. I would like to introduce you to our panel. First of all, we have here Jenna Roberts. Jenna Roberts is an Australian dancer and trained at the Mary Walton Mahon Dance Academy. Jenna joined the Birmingham Royal Ballet in 2003, and where she promoted to principal dancer and dance numeral ballets on stages all around the world. After a successful career as a dancer, Jenna retired from ballet in 2018 and trained as a Pilates instructor with Alan Herman. And since then, she has been teaching Pilates to clients, including dancers and the royal family in a studio in London. She recently relocated to Australia. Welcome, Jenna. We have Dr. Sari Kraft. Dr. Sari Kraft completed her medical degree in the University of Ottawa. She then completed her residency as a family doctor and fellowship in sport and exercise medicine. She currently works at the Cleveland Clinic in Canada, and she also works with the Canadian Sport Institute in Ontario, where she provides care for the Canadian national teams. She also covers medical coverage for the National Ballet of Canada and previously consulted for the Canada's National Ballet School. She travels internationally as a team physician with the Canadian National Figure Skating team and has provided medical cover for Tokyo 2020 Olympic Games and 2017 World University Games. She's also currently a lecturer in the Department of Family and Community Medicine at the University of Toronto, where she regularly teaches family, emergency, and sports medicine residents. Welcome, Sari. And lastly, we have Maja Berry. She's a sports dietitian working at the English National Ballet School, where she provides one-to-one nutrition assessments and support, alongside delivering nutrition lectures and workshops. She focuses on optimizing students with their fueling strategies for performance and recovery, with a particular emphasis on preventing and managing REDS. Maja, alongside with her work at the EMBS, she also works with professional athletes, football players, and she also supports other ballet schools in London. In the past, she also has worked for 5 years as an eating disorders dietitian with the National Health Service, and she holds a master in sports nutrition. Welcome, Maja.
Thank you.
So since we are all here, let's start. And why don't we start discussing about the topic, REDS? Some might know what it is and some might not know at all what it is. So I will hand over to Sari and then to Maja to explain what REDS is and why it's so important for dancers and the parents.
Sure, thanks, Nicole. So REDS is a short form for relative energy deficiency in sport, or sometimes we'll say REDS-D to add in dance because it's relevant there as well. And essentially, it's an imbalance between the energy that's coming into the body through nutrition and all of the energy that someone is using. So in a dancer, that would be all the dance training, performance, but then also all the energy just required to do all of the vital functions in the body, to repair muscle and recover after training and between training sessions, and then also what's required for growth and development, especially in children and adolescents, and then also for reproductive health as well. So in dance, sometimes with a high training volume, it can be easy to get a bit out of balance and not realize how much energy is actually required for that. And when we get out of balance, when nutrition isn't meeting all of our energy needs, that's when we get into REDS, or relative energy deficiency.
Should I carry on? So with that, from a nutrition point of view, we talk about energy intake versus energy expenditure, but I see it, or I explain it, as a bit of a pyramid. So at the bottom, you have the amount of calories. So making sure that in a dancer's day, they have enough calories for the amount of energy that they're expending in sports. But then the next layer above that is the amount of carbohydrates, because carbohydrates are the fuel. So if we have enough calories, but we don't have enough carbohydrates, that can still lead to low energy availability because we're not providing the fuel that the body needs for the amount of training that they're doing. Because very importantly, in relative energy deficiency, it is all about available energy, because the body will first expend it on sports and then only do the additional things that it needs to do, like repair and recover and grow and develop, if it has that available energy. If not, those additional systems won't work as well as they should. So the second tier is carbohydrate availability. Above that is timing. And this is equally as important as calories and carbohydrates, in the sense that if dancers, for example, don't have breakfast, they only bring a few bars into school, and they don't provide themselves with the energy at the time that they need it, they will still potentially struggle with RED-S, because although they might have the right amount of calories, it's not being given at the time that they need it. So those three kind of layers are really, really important, with the top of it being any supplements that might additionally be required, like vitamin D for bone support. So it's kind of looking at it in a simplistic term of calories in versus calories out, but on a more nutritional level, looking at the types of macronutrients that we're using and the timing of those to make sure that we are fueling optimally at the time that's needed.
Thank you both for introducing the topic. We are extremely lucky to have Jenna here, who, as said in the introduction, is a former principal dancer and also was once a full-time dancer and also a mother. Someone also who suffered from RED-S and has an invaluable experience here for our panel. So Jenna, would you like to explain to our panel your experience with RED-S? How does it look like? How does it feel like? And how was your experience?
Thank you for having me. My experience with it, you know, I felt I knew I had a problem, but I felt that I was in control of it. And I think that was also a thing of having some form of a control over what I was eating or what I wasn't eating. I also, throughout my career, it never stopped me from doing anything. I could do all my rehearsals, all my performances. At the stage when I was in the company, we were a very high performing company. We did a lot of shows per year. It was never an issue for me. I had a really great stamina. So I guess I was tricking myself a little bit into thinking that, yeah, that it wasn't a problem. Also, I never lost my period with my underfueling. I always had a very consistent period. And I think that was also what people thought when things did come up later on in my career, that everyone thought that I was healthy. I thought I was healthy because people kept saying, oh, you have your period. It's fine. You know, you're just thin. You're naturally like that. And so I think that was a big thing for me, that I thought because I had that, I was fine. You know, in the way it made me feel, my underfueling, I was always very tired, but I put that down to workload. But I feel like it was very isolating. It can be all-consuming as well, focusing on, you know, a certain way that I felt I needed to look for my career. And that as well, I think, carries a lot of shame with it. And I think, yeah, it was just a very probably isolating time during my career.
And Sari and Maja, do you have anything to add from your professional experience, or you want to draw in any literature? How does it feel like?
I think it can feel differently depending on the individual, because there are many possible consequences of RED-S and many ways it can manifest, which I think we'll talk about in a little bit. So it is very individual, but what a lot of people will describe, sort of like what Jenna was saying, is just feeling tired or fatigued, which many dancers do because they have a very busy schedule. But if there's been a change, or it's progressing, or it's not just a temporary fatigue or worsening, and it's not improving during break times or rest, then that would be something worth investigating. But often it's a sense of fatigue or decreased well-being. And sometimes it's hard to notice, and that's why it's so important to have a good team around, and a good network, and for all of us to be aware of the signs and to watch for it. Often dancers will sort of come in and start the whole diagnostic process because of injury. So if injuries are happening frequently or not improving as expected or taking a long time, sometimes that can be a signal. But sometimes it's not that obvious, and it can just be just reduced focus, reduced energy, or even just not progressing as well as expected in class.
Yeah, I think sometimes it's almost with hindsight, you are able to look back and go, oh, okay, that must have been RED-S, rather than when you're in the moment, you're just thinking this is normal. Of course, I'm feeling tired. I've got a really busy schedule. Of course, I'm not recovering properly. We're training 6 days a week. And it's only then, so often when I speak to people that I'm supporting, they look back at it and go, goodness, my energy is so good now. I don't know how I thought I was carrying on like that before. It's so different now that I'm fueling correctly. Or they'll suddenly find that they're growing by centimeters per month because all of a sudden their body has the right amount of fuel to be able to also grow. So sometimes I think it's more that we see it in hindsight than when they're in it, which makes it really tricky.
Thank you very much. So all these ties are very good also with our next question that discusses also manifestations. So what are the impacts of RED-S, short-term and long-term, and how would you prevent RED-S, also working with parents? So could we start perhaps with Sari and then pass on to Jenna afterwards, and then lastly to Maja?
Yeah, so in terms of the impacts, I touched on it a little bit. So with RED-S, as we talked about, our body does actually prioritize exercise. You would think it would prioritize our vital body functions, but through evolution, if you had to run away from something dangerous, your body will send all your energy to your working muscles so you can get somewhere safe and then deal with everything else later. So if you're sort of continuing to train and using a lot of energy for that, then the body will shut down other areas or try to conserve energy. So in the short term, often we will see a decrease in performance, but that might not be obvious. Like Jenna was saying, she was able to do all of her classes and continue. But it can be a little bit tough because we don't know what a dancer's full potential is if they're not fueling properly. So it might be that they're still performing well, but not to their full potential. And they might be at a certain level and be staying at that level, but not progressing or improving as expected, or not building strength. As well, especially in a growing or developing dancer, we might see that they're not following their growth curve. So there's a slowing down in their growth, or not going through puberty when we might expect based on when other family members did, or by their age. And then as well, we might see reduced immune function. So they might be getting sick frequently or taking a long time to get over viruses or illnesses. We might see more frequent injuries. We often talk about stress fractures. That's one thing that we do worry about quite a bit with bone health, but even just other injuries or muscle soreness, or recovering from a particularly busy training time or training day. There are also mental health consequences. So we can see disordered eating, sometimes intentionally, but also just low mood or anxiety or irritability. And then also cognitive issues like difficulty focusing, They might be slower to pick up choreography, have trouble remembering more complex combinations, and trouble remembering. And sometimes we can sort of bypass all that and really focus in dance class, and it can manifest in other areas of life too. So we might see a dancer sort of withdrawing from the rest of their life, or losing interest and energy for other things outside of dance. So that's where it can also be a bit tricky to diagnose. And then in the longer term, of course, we worry about bone health. As Maja was saying, in females especially, we build our maximum bone density before the age of 20. So we want to get to that highest level that we can, because after that, really, we're just trying to maintain what we have. So in the long term, there could be more risk of stress fractures or other fractures and osteoporosis later on, reproductive difficulties or infertility in males and females, and of course, longer term mental health consequences and eating disorders.
Thank you. Jenna, would you like to expand on that, on your experience? Yeah.
So I think, yeah, like for me, it came up in my career. I had probably throughout my career, it started maybe when I went to school to study at the Royal Ballet School. My first year there, I got a stress fracture. And I think that all stemmed from when I arrived there at the school. You get weighed, and which weighing was quite a big thing when I was at the school. And the day they weighed me, I was 45 kilos. And the head of healthcare at the time, I remember her saying that that was a good weight. And that for me, I thought, okay, well, this is someone that knows what they're talking about. I'm over the other side of the world. I'm very young. I'm only 16. Obviously, this is the benchmark for me. This is where I need to stay at to be healthy. And so I think that was a bit of the catalyst for my whole career, really, was that point. And so I think, been away from home. I then put on a bit of weight and was asked to lose weight. And then that's how it started. And I had a stress fracture in my first year. And again, I'd never really had an injury before, and had actually never really thought about my weight before this point. And so that was a big thing for me. And I got over this injury. I came back stronger. I finished my time at the school. But during this time, I was taking laxatives. I was making myself sick, not constantly, but usually after dinner time was when I was doing this. And then I joined the company, and this continued for quite a few years. I had another stress fracture when I was in the company, which this one was quite a big one, because I was been silly as a dancer and kept dancing on it because I was doing really well, and turned into a much bigger injury. But again, I found it during this time, I found it hard to build muscle. I was never a very, very muscular sort of dancer. So muscle building was quite difficult for me. Like I said earlier, I was always tired, but I feel like dancers moan a lot about being tired. And so that was just, that was the norm for me. And I think as well that during that time, I was still, again, like I said, having my period. And it wasn't till later on that we found out that I wasn't ovulating. And then that's when the long-term effects started to come in for me later on when I finished my career.
Thank you, Jenna. Sari, would you like to discuss, sorry, Maja, would you like to further discuss this? Like the long-term consequences with the clients you have worked?
Yeah, so I think sometimes the real struggle is that we only find out later on what the issues were that we could have prevented in adolescence. So Jenna, if I think of your story, if you look back, there were things that you would have loved to change, but didn't know enough, and the healthcare team around you didn't know enough at the time. Often I will see adults who have osteoporosis, and they can track it back to their adolescence when they got their period incredibly late. They probably didn't lay down the bone mass that they needed to. So it's often only when something really big happens in your life at whatever stage that happens, that you're then able to look back and go, oh, okay, so that's why. But then sometimes it's too late. So I think why we see it as so important in adolescence is that this is the time when we can help and support our dancers to be as strong and have the longest career possible by making sure that they prioritize their health now. And that sets them up well for their career in dance later.
So since this is a panel for the parents, what would you say to the parents? Like, obviously they want to support the kids and they want to support their career and also them not to get injured and to have a health long term. What will you tell them? Do you want to start, Sari?
Sure. I mean, one of the things, especially with growing dancers and adolescent dancers, is to recognize that it's actually normal to gain weight and for the body to change during puberty. So a lot of dancers may, grow up and they might have comments made about their body or get used to their body looking a certain way. And sometimes there's some fear of gaining weight or changing shape, but that's actually normal. So if someone's not gaining weight, then that's a problem. That should be something that we need to look into. The other thing is in terms of looking at nutrition, we want to, just like Maja was saying, we want to make sure that we're getting all the nutrients that we need, including all the food groups and a healthy, varied diet. And also being a bit careful about calling certain foods bad or trying to avoid certain things, because in dancers especially, they're often quite dedicated and disciplined, and sometimes it can be easy to hear some offhand comment that something isn't healthy or is bad or isn't helpful for their performance, and then start to avoid those things, and sometimes that can spiral into avoiding foods, and it may not be a specific intention to lose weight. It might be trying to improve performance, but sometimes it can actually have the opposite effect and lead into REDS. And of course, in medicine and in nutrition, we often do look at numbers and trying to make sure we're meeting the right calorie targets. But overall, we want to reduce the focus specifically on weight and number of calories, and more in terms of fueling properly and ensuring that we're recovering properly. Sometimes dance schedules don't account for enough rest, but dancers may not realize that the training that they're doing is important. It's the stimulus for their muscles to grow and to gain skills. But that improvement actually happens in the time between training, when they rest and refuel and repair their muscles, and they get stronger. So making sure that a dancer is doing their training as needed, but also taking advantage of rest and recovery breaks. And also making sure they don't lose perspective on the rest of their lives, because dance is really important. Often, to a young dancer, it's the most important thing, but it can become all-consuming, and sometimes you can lose perspective or lose interest in other areas of your life, and that's important for health and balance as well.
Thank you, Sari. So Maja, what will you also advise to parents in terms of, obviously, some of the parents are really far away, some of them live with them. So what kind of things they should be paying attention to?
So I think it's really important to look at each dancer holistically. So yes, their dance training is incredibly important, and that's what's going to make them into an excellent dancer. But it's also about taking an interest in their overall nutrition, making sure, for example, that you are checking in on whether they're having breakfast, are they having lunch, are they needing new recipes, are they getting bored of the foods that they're having at the moment. A lot of the time, dancers won't recognize that they're hungry. So I hear many dancers saying, well, I'm not hungry for breakfast, and we have to help train them to get hungry for breakfast. And often it's a bit like do you drink when you're thirsty, or do you drink to become thirsty? And sometimes for dancers, we have to do it that way around, that we have to just say you have to eat breakfast, whether you like it or not. And after a while, you will get used to it. So the more parents can be aware of their nutrition requirements, aware of their training schedule, aware of how much they're eating in a day and what quantities they're having, and being able to notice that, for example, they have not been having lunch as frequently because they're in a different training place where there isn't as easy access to food, or any kind of differences that a parent can pick up much sooner than the dancer can, would be really helpful to being on top of it before it develops into REDS. So the more a parent can understand the nutritional component, but also the mental well-being. So I think in this, Jenna, you've spoken about control. And I know when I listened to the student panel, Stephen spoke about control as well, and Kyra did too. And that's a really important element, that this idea that if you feel like you are worried about an assessment coming up or performance coming up, you might want to try and control an area that you feel you're able to control. And as a parent, this might be a really good way for you to be able to pick up that they are nervous, that they are worried about something, and suggest that they maybe see a performance coach or do something to help their mental well-being, which will allow them to not control as much on an area that they feel that they can control. This idea of control is a big element throughout dance, and really important that parents are able to support their dancers with it.
Thank you, Maja. And Jenna, what do you think? Because your experience being far away from home in a different country, a different time zone. So for those kind of parents, what would you advise? What kind of things they can, identify if their child is struggling with REDS?
I mean, it's very difficult when you're so far away. I think that you probably, as a parent, I can imagine my parents at the time probably thought that there wasn't much that they could do during that time. And so I was in the hands of the healthcare team. And so I assumed that they probably thought that they were looking after me. I think that I think my parents been educated, like everybody has been saying about, fueling and nutrition. I think if parents can best educate themselves that way, but also by watching their language, the way that they talk to their children, or even just talk about themselves. I've found that I've been very aware of it since having a child, and especially since having a little girl, but this is in males as well. But just been aware of what words you use for yourself, for maybe commenting on your own appearance or maybe somebody else's appearance, whether that's on TV or it could be anything. But I think that can be very triggering for people, and especially dancers, when we hear words like lean, skinny, even strong, we can sort of change those words in our head when someone says, oh, you look strong, to possibly that meaning, oh, am I a bit fat, or am I a bit muscular? Is that, like, what does that mean? So I think that just being aware of what you are saying can really help in sort of supporting your children in that way.
Thank you. And this is something that also came up in the student panel about the language, and something certainly very important to address, I think, in the industry in general. Thank you. Okay, so to Maja and Sari. So how to support recovery from REDS from your professional perspective, but also how then parents can get involved supporting dancers. Sari, would you like to start?
Sure. Yeah. So the simple answer is to increase intake and/or modify activity. But that can be actually very complex, especially with a demanding dance schedule and training and in busy performance times. So often we need a multidisciplinary team to help with that. I think the first step is really being aware and recognizing that there may be an issue, and then connecting with a healthcare professional who has experience dealing with relative energy deficiency, which depending on the location, that might be easier or harder to find, but even preemptively looking for a sport medicine doctor in the area, or a dietitian with experience working with dancers and with relative energy deficiency. Of course, if you're lucky enough to be at a school that has all of that already incorporated, then that's great, but not everyone has that same access. So I'm trying to identify that, and sometimes dance teachers will know about that. Sometimes the school may have recommendations, or sometimes just speaking to other parents who may have been through that. And then once you've identified at least someone or an entry point, then getting an assessment to really see what's going on, to figure out if there is an imbalance in nutrition and exercise, and then usually building a team from there. So a physician or the doctor would often be monitoring health status. That might involve some blood work, or bone density assessments, managing injuries. But dietitian is very important to have to calculate the actual energy needs and make sure that a dancer is meeting those. And sometimes having a psychologist or mental health professional as well is very helpful. Of course, for sure, if there's any disordered eating or issues with that, or other mental health issues, but sometimes even if it's completely unintentional and a dancer just didn't realize they weren't fueling properly, just because of the culture or some things that they may have heard over the years, they might find that it actually is difficult when they start to increase their nutrition, that it makes them anxious, or they're getting worried about their performance. So even just having someone to manage that. And as Maja said as well, looking at managing stress or any anxiety in other areas of their life, so that the food doesn't become one thing that they can control and focus on. And then often physiotherapists or athletic therapists are in contact with dancers regularly to help with recovery. So they might not be involved in the specifics of the nutrition, but they can be really helpful in terms of watching for signs, supporting recovery, and supporting the messaging from the rest of the healthcare team, and helping dancers follow their treatment plans.
Thank you, Sari. And I think it's really important also what you said of having a specialist who understands dance and sports, and to have a good network. That's also something that the IOC mentioned in the recent mental health consensus statement. So Maja, what do you think? How you support recovery from REDS, and also what you will advise parents also as part of the team supporting, hopefully?
So I see the school time of a ballet career as being the time where you accumulate as much information as possible, where you make use of every single available clinician who can help you understand yourself, your body. Your body is your tool for your career. So understanding every nuance about it is really important. And again, if we think of the student panel, Stephen talked about every single niggle, every thought that he thought was different to what he usually thinks. He would go and find somebody to talk to about it, to better understand, is there something I should be worried about? Is it fine? Kind of almost like no question is a stupid question. The more you understand, the better. And in terms of how parents can support, also understanding their child, understanding small little changes that might indicate that they are a bit more run down, or a bit more fatigued, or they aren't quite on top of things as much as they are. If I think of kind of the 3 years of ballet school that we have, each year brings its own intensity to it, and each year is a building block from the year before. So parents can help by making sure that their kids have recipes during the holidays that they've practiced that they can take to school with them. Some parents have done online ordering for their children, because the organizational part of, we're talking about kind of 16, 17-year-olds having to be independent for the first time in their lives. So often parents, especially when they're far away, can do simple things like ordering for them or providing a meal plan for them, hopefully with the help of a dietitian, but creating some kind of tool that their child doesn't have to do everything. Because if we think that they've got a really long day at school, they're now also having to shop for themselves, to cook for themselves, to structure their day, to make sure that they have everything. There are lots of little things that parents can do to help make sure that they are as organized as possible. So even if it is an Amazon order of snacks, to make sure that they've got in their room so that they don't have to go to the shops every day and they don't have time for that. It's little things that parents can do, but really, really importantly, it's understanding their child, understanding if their child tends to be really anxious around assessments, that's the time to be contacting them a little bit more, or making sure that they're on top of their nutrition a little bit better than they otherwise are, or getting the support of psychologists to help. We want our dancers to be resilient. We want them to be mentally strong. And a lot of the time there is so much pressure from them for their success in ballet, that making their mind resilient and strong and them being sure of themselves is the biggest tool we can give them in terms of them being an adult in ballet.
Thank you. And that also ties very nicely with the next question. So how parents and families can be involved in the prevention? Jenna, would you like to touch on that a little bit more? Like how you feel like parents can be involved, supporting their kids in preventing it?
Yeah, it's I mean, it's quite difficult, you know, because I feel like, just personally, when I was during my career going through it, I had very, very supportive parents, very supportive. But I think that they didn't know about my underfueling, about what I was going through, because I kept that very quiet, very hidden. I was embarrassed by it, I guess. And like I said earlier, a lot of shame around that. And so I didn't want people to know. And I especially didn't want my parents to know. I guess maybe, yeah, I thought that I don't know, that they would be disappointed, or I'm not quite sure why I never spoke to them about it. So I think that if it can be very difficult, especially for parents, if their child is really far away, to, you know, be involved in that way. I think that by not having any judgment, you know, by maybe, you know, letting your child just keep the conversation open, and by allowing them to come to you and to ask for help. Obviously, if it is a very, you know, dire situation and it's very serious, but if it is, you know, someone isn't being able to perform, or you know, train all day and things, then obviously people need to really step in. But I think it is a very difficult situation when, if you do go to your child and say, oh, you know, are you fueling properly? Are you doing this? They can feel very much like, oh, they want to close off and shut down, you know, and be like, yes, of course I am. Like, it's fine. There's no problem. So I think there is just that of having no judgment, trying to keep the conversation open by allowing your child to come to you, and hopefully that they will feel supported and safe enough that they can talk to you about it. Because otherwise, I think when you ask me how to support, I actually find that question very difficult. I don't know what my parents would have done. And I can't say now what I would have wanted them to do, because at that stage in my career, I was very like this, and this is what I wanted. This is what I was doing, and nobody was going to change that. And you know, especially when I was doing well and things, I think that, yeah, that no one could have told me or helped me in any way. It wasn't till I actually myself sort of thought, okay, I need to sort this. And especially later on in life, when I had a lot of fertility issues, that I think I wish that, you know, I'd been more open and had spoken to more people, like Maja had said earlier about psychologists, things like that. I wish that I had been more open during that time. But it's difficult for parents, I think.
And I think also it was different times, right? Now,
Yeah.
like, you know, the first article on REDS, I think, was published in 2015, and there's a lot more education than schools and also even medically professionals. They also know more now. So obviously it's different times now, and also of course, you know, parents are not experts, and that's what we always want to say in this panel. That's why also I think like speaking to professionals, you know, it's always good in case they feel like they suspect there's you know, something going on with the kids, and they want to be informed on the topic a bit more, or yeah, I think that's also important. So would you like to expand on that, Maja, and then Sari as well?
Well, I was just wondering, and Jenna, I've got a question for you in the sense that whether some of that shame or not being able to talk about it is to do with the side of it that was an eating disorder. I think there's a lot of shame surrounding eating disorders, whereas REDS has a different connotation to it. It's that somehow underfueling unintentionally has a different, we've been able to create a different conversation around it, where developing an eating disorder or disordered eating shouldn't be shameful, but somehow it is, whereas underfueling, we're okay, we can get on top of that, and whether that might have been a potentially difficult conversation.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes, yeah. I mean, sorry, what was the question you asked?
More whether now where we have the terminology of REDS, that makes it an easier conversation with parents.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, yeah, now, especially now that this conversation is actually much more open as well. And I think that dancers and, you know, the health teams and everything are aware now of this. You know, back when I was dancing, no one knew about this. Like, no one knew about the underfueling, anything like that. People were just calling underfueling. It was under that umbrella of eating disorder. That was it.
Yeah.
You know? So absolutely, I feel that now that this is, we're aware of this, a lot of that shame and embarrassment definitely is, I think it makes it a lot easier and will make that conversation a lot more easier for students to have with healthcare providers, with psychologists, with their parents. There won't be as much shame. So yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. I think it has changed.
And I think in that
also, I
sense,
guess, no, I just want to say that also the fact that it affects athletes and it's quite wide extended. It's not only dancers. So I think that also probably is a more wide open conversation.
And I think within that, sorry, Jenna, I think within that, the parents knowing about REDS, knowing what to look out for, being really educated on it. Again, Jenna, like what you were saying, not assuming that the healthcare team will automatically pick it up, that you as a parent are sometimes their first point of contact. And so the more you understand it, the more you're able to support your kids, I think is also really important.
I think as well, sorry, just to add, like, I think
yeah, of course.
just having been open about these conversations, and I think that, you know, like dancers, not just students, but professionals coming forward and speaking about their experiences makes it a lot easier than for people to possibly go, oh, actually, I'm feeling that at the moment, or I'm thinking that, and maybe I am underfueling, and start to just question things. So I think having these open conversations is so important, and people feeling confident enough to come forward about it and speak about their what their experiences with it.
Thank you. Sari, would you like to add to this?
Yeah, I mean, I think having these conversations, but also preemptively having the conversation. So just watching this panel, I think, is a great first step for any parent to increase your awareness about what to watch for and what the potential consequences are. And then talking to your kids about the importance of fueling hopefully before there is any issue, or learning together as a family about how to properly fuel your body and how we need to increase fuel as energy expenditure increases. So even a very young dancer, as they start adding extra hours to their training or they become busier, looking at ways to make sure they're fueling appropriately and talking about that as a family, even looking at preparing food and looking at the components of what they're having in meals and snacks, and emphasizing that importance of recovery, hopefully before they go away, so you can continue that conversation. They already have a basis in that. And then also, encouraging dancers to make sure they're getting their information from reliable sources like a dietitian or a doctor. There's a lot on social media right now that may or may not be very accurate. Often I see a lot of dancers when there are diet trends or they're avoiding a certain food, and that might be right for one person but not right for someone else. So if you have access to a sport dietitian, I always say it's great. Anyone who's involved in any high level activity really ideally should be talking to a sport dietitian and finding out their energy needs and making sure they're meeting them, and they know how to best support their recovery and performance.
Thank you, Sari. So we are getting till the end of our panel. So I would like that each of you discuss any take-home message that you think is important for our parents and the kids, or if you feel that there's something we didn't cover, it's the moment to discuss that. So would you like to start, Jenna, yourself?
Sure. I think that that for me, like, a ballet career, it's absolutely incredible, and it is just an amazing art form. But you have to remember that it is such a small part of your life, and the career is so short, and that it really is, like, in the grand scheme of your life, is just like a little blip, that ballet career that you have. And so what you do during that time, the effect that can have later on in your life is huge. I wish that I'd been more educated during my time. I wish my parents had been more educated, that I'd had like a support network around me during that time, and that I had been not as embarrassed and not as much shame around it, and been more outspoken about what I was going through, or what I was struggling with. And so, yeah, I think that we just take home is that remember that your career is, like, the student's career is very, very short, and that the consequences of what they do during this time can be absolutely life-changing. And it's not to scare anyone, and this was just my experience with it. But I think it's just really important to remember that there is a life outside of dance, and there is a life after dance, and it's really important to look after ourselves during that time.
Thank you, Jenna, and thank you for sharing this. More and more dancers talking about the experience with REDS, and I think that's really important for the community. So thank you very much. Sari, would you like to just share your key take-home message?
I think Jenna really hit the most important point of looking at a dancer holistically, and especially as a young dancer who's in training and have goals of becoming a professional. It can be very all-consuming, and your identity can get wrapped up in just becoming a dancer, and child about consequences later on. They might not care so much about that, but it is important. And even if we're looking at performance, in the short term, sometimes underfueling might seem to help or help with performance. But if we're looking at being able to enjoy dance for a long time and have a successful career and not be injured and be able to keep participating and even just keep the joy in dance, because we know with the mental health consequences of REDS and the injury consequences, sometimes it can interfere with that as well. So if we want to look at long-term and even in the medium-term performance and injury prevention, then it's very important to fuel properly. So I would encourage parents to learn as much as they can and be aware of the signs. And if there are any concerns, then really support their dancers in getting help and then encouraging them to follow whatever recommendations have been made.
Thank you, Sari. And Maja, last but not least, take-home message.
I think for me, it is about really using the student years to make the mistakes, to learn everything you need to do, to understand, to help your dancer understand their body and what it needs and how much fuel it needs for the amount of training that it does, because that will take them on to their career in dance and have them stronger and more resilient and better understanding themselves. And I think when we're talking about a form of sport where aesthetics tends to still be, there still seems to be quite an emphasis on it, the dancers can walk a kind of tightrope between health and reds. And therefore, understanding these nuances and understanding just how much they need to feel to stay above that. Ideally, we prefer them to have a buffer, but if that's the case, really understanding and knowing what they need to make sure that they can prevent injury, prevent illness, and have a really long career.
Thank you. Okay, so we are at the end of our panel discussion on REDS. We hope it was useful. Thank you to our panelists for sharing the time, the knowledge with our audience. Lastly, if there's any questions or any feedback, please see the link below the video, or there's a QR code at the end. We are aiming to have a Q&A in the coming weeks, so stay tuned. So thank you all for today, and goodbye.
Thank you.